So I'm really honored to have this opportunity to be moderating this panel today for you. And together with me, apparently, according to the MC, we have three amazing women leaders on the stage and one amazing leader of the opposite gender together with us. So we're going to have really interesting and enlightening, hopefully, discussion in the next 1 hour. So before I start to bombarding my panelists with questions, I'd like to just probably share a few sets of data to provide a backdrop in terms of what we're going to discuss today, all right? So 10.8%, 17.9%, 18%, 30%, 15%, $21 trillion. So 10.8% is the percentage of the female board members in all the Singapore exchange-listed firms last year. 17.9% is literally the board seats, percentage of the board seats taken by women leaders in all the Fortune 1000 companies. 18% literally is a percentage of the female employees in the tech industry across US. And when it comes to Asia, the percentage is even much less and more pathetic. 30%, actually less than 30%, is a percentage of the female managers from mid-segment all the way to the senior level across all the industries across Asia. Last but not least, Wanda Hope from Johnson & Johnson just talked about some of the data from McKinsey report. Very coincidentally, my company had this global leadership kickoff. We were also citing some of the data points from that report, talking about diversity and inclusion. I just want to repeat the two data here. Basically, 15% to 21% is literally for those companies who are strong in gender diversity. They are more likely to have the financial returns and outperform their competitors. And $21 trillion could be easily adding into the global GDP, including the $4.5 trillion in Asia Pacific by 2025, if all of us advance the gender diversity. So, very interesting. On one hand, the research tells us, hey, by doing the gender diversity, and then you can promote the business performance, profitability, and the economy. But on the other hand, the reality literally tells us there's a significant underrepresentation of female women leaders at all levels of the positions across the world, basically. So my question, basically starting from here, right? Sophie, you're the one literally driving the whole, you're the subject matter expert in terms of diversity and inclusion, and you are the one driving, the whole Asia Pacific, for Dell in terms of the diversity and the inclusion. So what's your viewpoint on this kind of a situation? I call it the far from ideal situation, like all of us actually are in here today, and why do you think we have such a significant imbalance?
Sure, well, thank you for that very detailed introduction. I think there's kind of two pieces to that question. One is you look at the representation of girls in STEM-related fields, and then you look at overall representation of women in management in the corporate sector. So there's actually a really great report that I always go back to, and every time I read it, it gives me new information, it inspires me. Actually, UNESCO did this in 2015, and it's called A Complex Formula. So for those of you who are responsible for overseeing STEM-related hiring or talent development, I encourage you to read it. And it looks at the performance of young girls compared to boys in STEM-related subjects in school. And until about puberty, boys and girls perform at the same. And in some cases, in many countries, actually, girls outperform boys. But somewhere around 13 or 14, that performance begins to drop. And UNESCO had done this comprehensive formula of research where they had actually gone into the schools, gone into the local communities in emerging markets in Asia, and tried to figure out what was going on. And they came away with 4 key findings. One was the way that teachers teach the subjects. So often calling on boys first, giving boys preference, rewarding boys for positive responses. The other one was materials. The textbooks and the content, the way it was presented, reinforced and introduced traditional gender stereotypes. So boys' names were used for examples around STEM-related fields, and girls where you actually see images of girls doing things like more around doing things with plants or nature or feeling or caretaking roles. They actually looked at the external culture, which starts to reinforce traditional gender stereotypes. And then actually was then access to tools and technology. So looking at actually what materials were presented in the classroom. And so then when you look at it from that perspective, it's no wonder that then you really start to see this drop off. So you have a lot of companies that are starting to target that demographic in university, which is often actually too late. You need to start younger if you want to have more girls in the STEM-related fields. When you actually look at the representation of women in management in the corporate sector, I think that the previous panels really covered this in terms of mentorship, sponsorship, unconscious bias, which Wanda talked about. And then the next step is how do we actually begin to break that down? At Dell, one of the ways that we do that is through the Many Advocating Real Change, which is a program at Catalyst. And I'd be more than happy to talk about that in more detail. But it's really a program that is aimed at identifying unconscious bias in the workplace, and then what role do executives and people managers have to begin to actually challenge that, break that down, and lead more inclusively to ultimately increase the opportunities for women to achieve and have the opportunity to be successful in senior leadership.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point of view, right? Basically, lots of things actually start from young, how we can, from the diversity, leadership grooming perspective, how we can really encourage the young, the girls, starting from very young to enter into the tech industry, starting from the STEM, starting from university, everything. So I think I'd like to also hear from Kate. Kate basically, again, is also a thought leader in the diversity and inclusion area. So what's your viewpoint on this kind of a situation, how we can kind of improve that?
Yeah, I think Sophie's provided a great overview of some of the deep problems that exist in our education system at a junior age. What I'm specifically interested in, and I've been focusing on, and I speak with clients daily, is really around the women in leadership space, and particularly in tech. And we certainly know that now we're heading into 6 generations in the workforce. And I think each generation brings its own core values and beliefs to those roles. But certainly when we're working in an environment where there is bias that exists, we're certainly seeing that women are shying away from those opportunities. And the fundamental systems around HR processes, from recruitment through to onboarding, learning opportunities that are available, career advancement, promotion, succession opportunities, calibration sessions and performance reviews, are inherently deeply stemmed in biased systems of decision making. So we know that that level of grit and resilience that women have to continue that can lead to a sense of burnout and fatigue around it. So the ability to ensure, I think, around women in these leadership roles, particularly in tech, being able to tackle some of these ongoing challenges is going to be key.
Seema, I know you have been, have this interesting background. Most of us here are kind of working for corporate, and you did work for corporate before, but now you're actually an entrepreneur. You've been, engaging in the startups, and your company actually is really dedicated and committed to, improving or helping the women in terms of their careers. So your viewpoint on this imbalance and why we're, in this kind of a situation today?
Sure. So the answer to that would basically come from my own journey, and I work with a lot of women as part of this journey. I think it's correct to say that you need to have STEM education in school, but education is skills. Right? It doesn't give you the skill to perform at corporate. Today, education is just about skills. When you have to perform in corporate, you need more than skills. You need to know what's the right project to do, whom to work for. You need, the early years are always great. You would easily find a mentor and a sponsor. It's only when you're 10 plus years in experience then things get tough because you have other complexities. So typically in technology, it's about resilience. So I've seen a lot of females drop out in their working life beyond 7 because the resilience drops, the support systems and the structures are not there to help them navigate beyond. Again, a lot of them give into personal situations. Okay, I'm moving families because in technology you move a lot. It's a highly innovative field. The positive is you learn a lot, but you move a lot. And are your systems and support structures there to support you? Tying it to my own experience, I moved with suitcases very easily until I had my second child. Because when I had my second child, I moved with a big family. And I moved geographies with 0 network, 0 sponsorship. And that's where it sucks in. That I'm not having a corporate backing today, which is gonna give me all the training, give me all the upskilling. And that's where the entrepreneurship comes. Because I had to go, reinvent, rebuild my ecosystem in Singapore when I came here 7 years ago. Well, I was fortunate that I could do it simply because I was trained to it in my previous corporate. I used to work for Novartis. Pharmaceutical companies are great at mentoring women. Whether you're in technology or not, it doesn't matter. They really give you good coaching. So I had a great sponsor who was part of the board and mentors. But when you come into the real financial technology world or others, so I realized I could do it, but not everybody else can do it, right? For me, access to opportunities was easier. So I met a lot of women in Singapore who are highly trained. They have studied in the Stanfords and the Harvards, and then they have taken career breaks. And that set me thinking, why women take career breaks? And taking a break is one, but then you come back. So the comeback is hard. So that's how my current venture, in technology, you become a problem solver. So I wanted to solve the problem of bringing women back into workforce. And that's my mission. I realize there are a lot of biases to cover in the journey because women lose confidence when they're out of workforce. The coworkers don't have a bias when you're in because, oh, you've taken a break. So how do you solve it? And these are solutions beyond technology. It's innovation, and it's innovation of people. So I think that's where my view is. We have to collaborate. One learning I had in my journey, which I did wrong early on, is you have to ask for help timely, not break down, because the resilience, the breaking down easily happens because you don't ask for help. And we don't want to be vulnerable, so we don't ask for help.
Yeah, that's a great advice, great sharing in terms of how we overcome the challenges, right? So we're going to come back to that point later. So back to Ajit, basically from a, male, kind of a man, leader's perspective, why do you think we have such an insignificant, I would say significant imbalance, in terms of the women leadership versus traditional, men leadership?
Thanks, Lynn. That's a tough question, right? And I'm being put on the spot. There are probably about half a dozen men in this esteemed gathering. So let me answer that from 2 aspects. And as a couple of my colleagues in the audience know, I'll be just completely candid. One, I'll answer that as a father first. I have 2 wonderful children, a 13-year-old girl who's going on 21, and a 7-year-old boy who's going on 2. How many people in this room have children? Just a show of hands. Wonderful. And I see 2 adorable little girls sitting there. Are they yours? Congratulations for bringing them along. A round of applause. Smart, very smart. Get them hooked early onto this stuff. Okay, so it was my own bias, right, growing up. And I realized when I was a father that society constantly reinforces the very same biases that we are trying to fight here. And Sophie I had almost goose flesh listening to that because that report is mecca for me when I read it, and I keep pushing it out to my teams. One request I would have, how do you want to break this, is as parents, do not reinforce your own unconscious biases on your children. So when your girl wants to buy only black and gray, like my girl does, don't say no. When your boy wants to wear pink, Don't say no, don't say yes. Both are, no, I mean it, both are important. Because the moment you do that, they start wondering, why is this person telling me that? That's where unconscious bias starts from. So that's my first answer. What we are trying to solve for is a much tougher question, which is today, in today's world in tech, how do we get leaders up the pipe? The answer is very, very, very carefully and in a very difficult way, simply because there just are not enough people around. As a hiring manager, I currently have 2 VP positions open, and I am hiring for them, and I was very clear to the search firm saying, I want to see a screen that's diverse. People laughed at me. Was it possible? So a final set of candidates that we went up, we had about 6 candidates that we put up, 4 were women. The problem was it took me 6 months to get to those 4 people. You need to look hard enough. So question comes back to even the women hiring managers, right? Are you looking hard enough, or are you giving up early? And that comes through your talent pipeline conversations. I've been in talent roles before. Do you settle, or do you continue to look? And if I may just be very quick on the last one, the question to really ask ourselves is not about promoting women. I think that's the wrong question in my books. It does women a lot of disservice, because the men look at someone getting a great job and say, yeah, she got it because Sophie's a woman. Otherwise, she wouldn't have got the job. So that is a bias we have to break. And therefore, I would always say, right, look for opportunities to make the role of men and women equally relevant in the corporate world. It's not about promoting women. It's not about demoting men. We are answering the wrong question if we go about on that one.
Yeah, you actually touched base on a very interesting question later we're going to discuss as well. It's about, not just the roles, but also even the future of work, especially in the tech industry. That's a big backdrop, and how we're going to develop not just a female leader, literally the next generation leaders. So we'll come back to that later. So you actually also talked about the barriers, let me probably share this a little bit. This month, May 2018, actually marks 40 years since the American management consultant, probably you heard of her name, Marilyn Loden. She actually coined the phrase of glass ceiling 40 years ago. So basically, exactly this month, it's very interesting. 4 decades passed, right? If you look at some of the statistics I just shared early on, it seems that we haven't made much progress, honestly speaking, and the glass ceiling seems to be still intact. So with that, I'd like to ask Kate. Kate, apparently you are one of the role models for lots of women out there who aspire to, progress their careers. And Kate sits, she's not just the vice president for SAP, she also sits in the boardroom of a company. So I'd like to hear from you, how did you personally actually break the glass ceiling? How did you make it?
Yeah, I want to share a story, and I think after 26 years now in the workforce, I've had lots of opportunity to reflect. I'm going to share with you a story. I was 42 at the time. I was working in New York City, and that song that if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere is very true. The women in New York were doing deals in the corridors on a minute-by-minute basis. It is certainly the powerhouse of women working and getting ahead. I was 42. I was leading a business and under $520 million under management of projects. I was a partner in a global consulting firm. I was there for 2 years. I'd moved from Australia at that stage. I'd just sold a $30 million business and had decided this was going to be my home. I put my hand up for a leadership role, and by this stage, after 13 years of university study, running a very successful business, and one of the strongest leaders in the consulting practice, I thought for sure this is a good stand. I developed, as we do in Australia, lots of networks to get established. And I was asked by my mentor at the time a question, and I outright had the answer for this without even thinking about it. The question was, do you want the job? Do you want the job now as it is? Will you take it? Or do you want to take the job on merit? Being Australian, 20 years of experience by this stage, of course I want it on merit. I've earned it. I know how to do this role, and I'm certainly leaning in and waving my hand loudly that this is the role for me. I'm going to say to you, the feedback I got back on the back of that was that my male colleague got the role. So while I was given the opportunity, the ladder was thrown down for me to take the role, and I could have taken that role in my networks. The fact that I stood firm and asked for the role on merit meant easily that unconscious bias was going to set in, and a male peer who had years of negative feedback secured the role. So my life lesson now is that merit doesn't exist. Catherine Fox writes a great book, and I suggest you write down the title. It's Stop Fixing Women. Brilliant. Stop fixing women. So the ability here of what we're talking about is that if you think you're going to get your next opportunity on merit, don't wait. Take the role, take the opportunity. Whatever's passed to you, absolutely lean in. And I know this now for a fact, because I've certainly taken other roles in this space, is that once we get one woman onto a board or a leadership position, it's seen as a token. 2 is a buddy. 3 is when we get progress. So if you're there first, throw the ladder down for your buddy throws the ladder down for your third person, and you've got 30% on the board where you're going to make change for women in leadership roles. And we're clearly not there yet. We're close, but we're clearly not. So I have a role on the board, 2 boards now actually, is the 100% Project, which is a gender equity research company based out of Australia. We're about to launch our new research into Asia. And we actually look at some of the challenges that are faced in this market, specifically leaning on the research and experience we've had out of Asia. We hold events, once again at professional services firms, in actually putting through what are some of the challenges that we're facing. I also sit on a HR Institute board to actually look at, within organisations, how do we actually break the hire to retire cycle and bring back a level playing field into this world to think that we can actually now not only target 30%, but why not get to 50% on board of gender equality? Thank you.
So it's really enlightening to hear what you say, right? Basically, there's a resilience, there's a, bold, be bold enough, raise up your hand, don't wait. And there's a kind of a confidence as well, just to try yourself out, be bold enough. So this is really good takeaway for all of us. I'd like to turn to Seema. Early on, you just mentioned, there are lots of barriers, for you, especially in those startup, as an entrepreneur, your company is really committed to help the women from dropping out of their career. And I read some research before, basically in India's case, right? For example, almost half, 50% of the women managers. I'm not talking about the entry level, people, young girls. Literally the mid-level managers, they actually drop out of their careers due to various reasons in India. So maybe you share a little bit,
Sure.
from your end, how really, we can overcome, or you yourself personally overcome some of these barriers. And is that all success, or if there's a failure, how you overcome that as well?
So just talking specifically about India, Indians worldwide, if you're first generation Indian, there's a societal pressure. If you're second, third, it starts decreasing, right? So like in Japan, you have a different norm. So typically, the partnership at home is not equal. It will change in the millennial generation for sure. Things are changing, but if you're a Gen Xer before, the partnership is not always equal. And when you are a manager level, there is an expectation to perform at work, and you have a performance at home, and you're doing a 200% job. So this is how we started Pink Stripes, actually. We started with India in focus, and then we realized the issue was not just India and Indians, but the issue is global. So it's just that when you have lack of partnership and a culture at work where meritocracy is key, you are getting burned out. You've been a performer for the first initial years of a career throughout, but it's just that brink, where you're moving from middle management to senior management, where you are being compared, your performance is at par with others who may not be shouldering that responsibility. So, whereas I think some companies do a great job with the mentoring and the coaching and internal services and flexibility at work, I think one of the common themes is flexibility at work brings in more value in your performance, and then you can still do it. But if you're stuck to a FaceTime world, you can't, which I was here in Singapore for the first time in 17 years of my career, when I was working for a bank here, and I was having heavy FaceTime, and I could see the struggle at that time. So there are different reasons why the managers struggle and dropout happens. So flexibility, I would say, is the most important, and partnership within.
Yeah. So basically, every problem, there shall be some kind of solution, right? So I think later on when we talk about how we overcome the challenges, basically these challenges we're facing right now can give us a hint, where we should focus on to address the issue. So Ajit, I know you are, a father of two, and so I probably ask you a dumb question. Talking about the glass ceilings, right? If you were, do you think, if you were a woman, would you be still in where you are now today? Apparently, you're HR leader, you've been in all those multinational companies, and you've been based in various kinds of locations worldwide, and you have over 20 years leadership experience. So imagine if you were a woman, would you be in the same spot here?
Personally, for me speaking, I think I would. And the reason I say that is simple, right? I grew up in a very different environment, similar to how my colleague Seema has shared, and there was another Indian distinguished speaker in the panel before me. Conservative family in the south of India. My upbringing was very different to what you see as my persona today. My role model has been my mom all my life. She did not complete her 7th grade. But because of her, we had food on the table because my dad thought he was a rock star businessman. Clearly not. So that didn't work out really well. So irrespective of me being a man or a woman, I think the ceiling that Kate alluded to, the wall that Seema alluded to, I wouldn't call it the ceiling, right? Because she's talking about entry back into the workplace, exists. And we all have each of our own ceilings. For some, it's gender. For others, it's color. I can tell you, I had a brown ceiling. The first time, it's an uncomfortable conversation. I'll tell you that right now. The first time I went to the US was a very different conversation. So we all have our own ceilings that we make up. The question is, what do we do about it? I think that's what I would really like us to get to in these conversations. Unfortunately, time is not on our side to get into a detailed one. But my own take is, Monique was sitting here some time ago and she made a very pertinent point for all the women who are considering getting life partners at some point in time and who haven't yet made the error. Be careful and choose wisely. I think we are trying to solve only one side of the equation, which is the role of men or women in the workspace. You are only successful in the workspace if you are successful in managing your expectations at home. You can't do that if you are stuck with a partner who doesn't respect or understand the ceiling you face and helps you solve that. You ought to take a really deep look in the mirror and say, is this person the person I really want to hang out with for the rest of my life? I'm being completely blunt, folks, because that makes an enormous impact on what you bring to work. Because you cannot solve much of the solutions at work by yourselves. The variables are not all in your control. The variables at home, they're completely within your control. So my advice, my counsel, my view, my opinion, personal opinion, is the glass ceiling exists. I am here simply because Anjana, my wife, and one of the members here knows her socially, is an absolute darling. She's the opposite of me. Gentle, kind, smart, intelligent, good looking. And she allows me to be successful. She allows me to have an insanely crazy travel schedule. I respect her for that. I could have had someone, male or female, who then turned around and said, it's your job to manage the kids. I'm sorry. And I'm done. So what am I trying to solve? So my take on it as a man, as a father, is try to solve that equation as well in your life. Because there's only so many things your boss is going to solve for you. Huh? So just be careful about the whole sponsorship conversation. I know it's a controversial statement to make, but it's an important one to make.
This is good. This panel is turning into a relationship counseling session. Okay, it's terrific. But I totally agree with you. Leadership is not really just based on the gender. You know, it's really about as a human being, whether it's you're a man or woman, there are common challenges we're facing as a person. For me, right, the biggest ceiling for me, myself, is actually the fear. The fear inside me, you know, the sense of insecurity, you know, all these kind of negative emotions as a human being, you probably encounter all the time. How you overcome that, first of all. Deal the relationship between you and yourself, and then deal with the relationship between you and your spouse or partner, your family, and then deal with the, you know, the relationship between you and your bosses, your colleagues, and your, you know, the whole corporate world out there. So I think really, really good insights. So I want to ask Sophie, you know, you definitely amazed me because I know how hard it is to even learn, you know, English. I'm a native Chinese speaker, originally from Beijing. So you actually speak Mandarin. It's very hard for, you know, native English speaker to pick up a non-alphabetic kind of language, and you've been, you know, living in Beijing for years. So, you know, how did you actually go through in your own personal leadership journey, right? How did you, again, also break the, you know, overcome the barriers to become where you are today?
Great, thank you. I'm just so inspired by my fellow panelists. I hope you are as well. Yeah, I did. I moved to China when I was 19, and within 2 weeks, I knew it was the place that I wanted to live and work, and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. It was back in 2002, and it was just a very different place than it is today. And China's just truly a remarkable country that, and I love the culture and people so deeply. And when I started, at that time, I was trying to find work, but no one would hire me because I didn't speak Chinese, which I thought was fair enough, and I was also very young and didn't have any work experience. So I went back to university and changed my major, got a double major. I went to NYU, made sure I learned Mandarin, and did my junior year abroad there, really made sure I understood the culture, built a network. And as soon as I graduated, I got on a plane and I moved to Beijing. Didn't have a job, didn't have anywhere to live, but I figured I'd figure it out, you know, hubris of your 20s. So, so I immediately went on to all of the Chamber of Commerce websites, found a list of every single company I could possibly find in China, and sent out my CV in mass. And I got called into a major multinational company, and I was very pleased. I had my resume and I had a briefcase, and I thought, okay, I'm really ready to go. And the first question I had at the interview was, did I have a boyfriend? And was I planning on getting pregnant? And I was so shocked and instantly demoralized because I was so pleased. I had learned Mandarin. I was told I needed to do that. I had a double major. I had a great degree. I was passionate about China. And all I was seeing was my reproductive abilities and how that might affect the workplace. So I left pretty demoralized, and I must have gone on over 100 interviews, and it was a constant stream of no, 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 that I didn't have any working experience. So I went and I got myself some working experience. I volunteered, tried again, and I was told, no, you don't have the right education. I had a double major in theater and East Asian studies, and no one would hire me in any capacity really for that, anything outside of that. So I went back to school, got a master's degree in public policy and economic development in France, looking at Asian development from a European perspective. And so I went back to China, and I thought, great, now I've got a really 2 fancy degrees. I speak Chinese. I obviously love China. I'm ready to go. And I was told I didn't have the right kind of experience. So again, no one would hire me. And it was finally at this point that I had this aha moment of, every time I had this negative response, I compensated by going and creating my own opportunities. I would either go and volunteer for someone for free, just to get the experience. Or I started my own organization when I was living in Paris for women pursuing careers in international public policy to get business experience. Since no one would hire me, I figured, well, I'll just start my own. And then finally, when I came back to China, I realized I couldn't wait for people to open the door for me. I had to open a door for myself, or I had to create a door for myself. And ever since then, while I've always worked for individuals who I deeply admire, one works for leaders, right? Not necessarily organizations. I realized that I'm going to be the one that has to carve my own career path. So while you may not necessarily know what you want to do in 5, 8, 10 years, you do have to have some ownership of your own career path. And when a door is presented to you, you have to go for it. Because in the end, it is you that is going to create that opportunity. No one else is going to do that for you. If a door is open for you, you have to seize it, and you have to really take ownership of your own career trajectory, and be willing to work hard and hustle to get the experience needed in order to be successful.
That's excellent advice. I think your personal journey, is really inspirational. So that comes to actually the last question, right? It's all about how we can get more women into the leadership roles. How we can, we as women, can progress ourselves, become a better leader. So, and how can men be part of the solution? So probably I start from Ajit. So what's your viewpoint? I know you have done amazing work around, promoting, advocating the women's cause. Share some experience.
Clearly not enough. Because if you look at my own company's track record, I've just spent 1 year, but that's a dumb excuse. I'd like to see more women in tech. And today in my role with Applied Materials, we are a deep tech manufacturing organization. And I head HR for manufacturing globally. If you were to pick one spot where it's hard to attract women, it's manufacturing. And we have plants in Texas, it's a very progressive part of the world. We have a plant in Singapore, really progressive part of the world. And we have a plant in Santa Clara and Gloucester. So the conversation needs to change, right? And I was listening to someone on TV the other day, and this lady who was a minister said something really that struck in my mind, and I was telling my wife, I'm going to use it today. And she said, we have to change the conversation, and she said, it is no more time for women to speak up. It's time for them to be heard. And I thought that was very, very interesting, because it is not that Asian people or Asian women or Western women don't speak up. It's that the audience is not receptive to the signals they're getting from what that women are saying. So that's the first conversation we need to change. The second conversation that we really need to change is acknowledge the fact that you're dealing with a limited talent pool. So if you are the head of a business and you have 10 machines that are doing a particular job, 2 of those machines are doing a specialized job for you, and you want to get 3 more machines, they're just not available in the market. You would logically go to these 2 machines and you would take really good care of them because you don't want them to break down. Treat your resources, your people the same way. If you have 2 women engineers on your team, and when you do your talent reviews, when you're a leader leading them, you see development gaps that you believe will hold them back, make the extra effort. It is worth it. Why? Simple reason, it's math. There aren't enough women going around. Unless the conversation around STEM education changes, your supply is not going, the curve is not going to curve into a hockey stick. You are going to deal with what you have. So our job as leaders, especially in my function in human resources and as business leaders, is to make sure that you take that limited pool you have and you maximize its impact. Every one person that you drop off because you didn't drop a ladder down should be a shame on me moment. And I was genuinely telling you, I said I wish I had done more, because I probably have had at least a dozen instances in the past where I now look back and I go, Ajit, you really messed that one up. You should have done more. And yeah, but that is something that we should really work towards.
It's very encouraging to hear a man leader and a HR leader to talk, like this, because I hope there are lots of, HR managers out there. By working together, definitely we can, do a lot more. And apparently there are lots more work to be done, honestly. So with that, let me ask Seema, again, how we can kind of, really get more women leaders up on the stage, and then especially develop the next generation leaders.
So I go back to what was said in the morning. It's a trait that has to be built from the foundation years. So it starts in the high school. I actually ran an entrepreneurship boot camp for high school kids this year, and it was amazing to see they have so much potential. So for me, leadership starts early. You learn from home, and then you take it on to your institutes and corporate journey. One thing that I thought worked well, which I saw, is when companies start this leadership training or giving you, getting you into that role early in your career rather than wait for X amount of experience, because it has to build up. So it's continuous learning and working in the early years, getting support from where you are, be it at home, at work, into the journey. And to Sophie's point, please volunteer. I request women who want to come back to work to volunteer, because it's a very safe zone to try out things. So volunteer early to whenever you can and try out your interest. Sometimes leadership comes easy when you know what your interests are, because we're kind of more passionate about it.
Yeah, excellent. So Kate, in your viewpoint of how we can, develop more kind of a next-gen women leaders?
Yeah, and I think this is my favourite question. I'm going to answer it from two sides. Personal first is that the first thing I would say is, if you don't back yourself, no one else will. So if you're looking for the next promotion or the next gig or the next opportunity, unless you're going to dive in, no one else is going to back or support you. I was working at PwC in Australia at the time. I got a call from Richard Branson's EA because I was developing some work around authentic leadership for PwC partners across Australia, and I'd taken it up to New York and London. I was in Perth facilitating a workshop, and he was interested in seeing me in 4 weeks' time when he was flying out to Australia to do a similar program for his leadership team across Virgin. You can imagine I was shaking. Are you kidding me? There's no way in the world I could possibly do this. The risk of regret of me saying no was far higher than my fear of not diving in. I flew back on the red eye from Perth to Sydney that evening. I went into the office at 8 o'clock and resigned. I saw out my 4 weeks' notice, and in week 5, I was emptying out the back of my car with facilitators and guidebooks, ready to facilitate a week's conference for Rich Branson's executive team in Manly in Australia. That led for what was the next 4 years of my executive coaching and leadership development business, which I sold to Ernst & Young for $12 million in 2012. When I was emptying my back seat of my car with facilitator guides about to facilitate this conference, I had no business cards. I had anything but a cell phone and a 1-bedroom apartment beside the beach in Australia. And I just went for it. Now, that opportunity of me doing that led to my opportunity in New York. So when you build your career on the back of something else and you believe in yourself and you can create it, others will see that, what you've created, and give you other opportunities as well. Second slide I want to share with you is about SAP. So there are certainly lots of things we've done at SAP, and we followed a very similar suit to what J&J have been doing around diversity and inclusion. Last year, in addition to my role in the business, I wrote the global D&I strategy for SAP, and I rolled that out. There's a series of 122 stakeholder meetings globally across SAP, across 150 countries. I delivered that to the board and presented it back globally in the end of January to Waldorf. And some of the key things that we learnt out of this was certainly around driving an inclusive culture. While we know that conscious bias raises awareness, it doesn't move the dial on changing women on leadership roles. We know what changes is what interests my boss needs to fascinate me. So the bosses and our leaders demonstrate the behaviours that we want to see. So when we see males, like Ajit talk about leaning in and males speaking out for other women that are around the boardroom or the leadership table, is what the teams will follow suit. So driving leadership around inclusive culture, and Burson through Juliet Burke out of Deloitte's done an amazing job in this space, that if you want to know what those inclusive culture leadership behaviours are, and running a 360-degree feedback tool, which we're looking to do in APJ for SAP, is the way to shift that dial on the leadership behaviours on inclusiveness. The other thing too I'm going to say is that what we're really proud of, what we drove in APJ, was out of our president, Adair Fox-Martin, who's now sitting on the board in Waldorf, was a return to work program for working mothers. We took in 30 women who were returning to work and gave them 6 months roles within SAP in the Singapore office. This was funded out of the APJ global budget, and they had then the opportunity after the 6 months to prove their value. And this was a leaning in opportunity where they can then take on roles other than that. They all secured full-time permanent jobs at the end of 6 months. And it gets better. This program now, I've got a goosebump moment, was now adopted just last month to take globally. So this return to work program globally across SAP.
Excellent. I
Thank
think
you.
we really need a lot more leaders like you, and also the corporations like SAP, even Dell as well, and also my own company and Applied Materials, literally really advocating the cause for women, and really take actions to change the picture, right? So
Can I
yes.
just mention one final thing, a
Sure.
third element, my apologies, Seema. SAP also has the technology built in Business Beyond Bias. It's built into your HR system success factors, which takes out all the phrases Wanda mentioned earlier around behaviours that are seen as being male orientated, and they are things as simple as driving financial performance. Women won't apply for roles.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. How about the Dell, Sophia? I know you guys, I actually got to know you at the AmCham Singapore session. You sit with the Google CMO, my counterpart for Google, and also the Microsoft president, talking about the women leadership. I was really impressed.
Yeah,
Yes.
so what we do at Dell, we have a couple, I'd like to actually recognize the Dell table. This is our Women in Action Employee Resource Group that's back there. Hi. They're a tremendous group. And the group that you see here today is actually part of a much broader global network of Women in Action. So this is our employee resource group. It's a network of employees that come together around shared topics. And this one is specifically looking at gender and women. In Asia, we have over 5,000 people that are part of this network. Globally, it's one of 14 ERGs that represent over 30,000 employees across 60 countries. And it's a powerful network that provides exposure, leadership development opportunities, as well as directly contributes to the business through a local representation model, which ties into a regional representation and sponsorship model, which ultimately ties into a global sponsorship and rolls up to Michael Dell. So it's a key way for us to be able to create alternative career opportunities and exposure through our employee networks. In addition to that, we also run something called the Many Advocating Real Change program, which I mentioned earlier. So Panelist, which is a global non-for-profit organization headquartered out of DC, which produces some of the leading research on gender equity. Michael Dell is on the board of that, along with our Chief Diversity Officer, Brian Reeves. And it really looks at looks at understanding unconscious bias in the workplace and what is the role of leaders and executives in terms of mitigating that and addressing that. And then we finally complement that with accountability mechanisms on our diversity and inclusion strategy. So I know for some companies it's really, D&I councils are very popular. I personally am not a huge fan. I think it needs to be embedded as part of the business leadership team. So one of the things that we do in Asia is that as part of the quarterly QBR, as part of the QBRs, we actually put in diversity reporting as just one of the many things that are covered. And it is a key part of our business. And in addition to that, when we do the reporting to show how each of our leaders are performing in terms of the representation of women within their organization, we talk about what our customers are doing in this space. So that diversity and inclusion is not bolt on to HR, but it's a key part of our business performance. And so then one of the things that I'll do is I'll talk about what our key and top customers are doing in this space and how can we better partner with them to share with them what we're doing, as well as to also understand from them what they're doing. And as a result, diversity and inclusion for us is really a business driver of our organization. And we've seen female representation steadily increase, as well as female hiring as a result of that embedded approach.
Okay, so what, literally, according to what you said, basically what Michael Dell has said, actually 3 days ago, I've been following him on LinkedIn. So he posted something around the diversity and inclusion on LinkedIn. You can check that out, 3 days ago, the posting. So what he says was exactly actually what you are talking about here. So, which means he was not lying. Perfect. All right. So, okay, before we wrap up, I think we're probably only 5 minutes left. Maybe we open this up, forum up. If there's any question from the audience, the women leaders and Ajit can take up.
Hi, I'm Yogesh. I'm so glad I stayed till the end because I just want to amplify what was said in this panel from the perspective of, as a business, we know that customer retention has tremendous value, right? Getting a new customer is much tougher than kind of earning that loyalty and keeping that existing customer. So Ajit's point about really cherishing and grooming the talent that we have in-house, right, is extraordinary, right? Couple that with what you just talked about, at Dell and SAP, at United Technologies, right? I'm seeing that a whole lot in the last 5 years, where the performance conversation is handed over to the employee because you own your destiny. You need to know what you want out of the role or your career. But then couple that with the fact that with constant monitoring of the process, right, at quarterly reviews, right, you get to force leaders to talk about identifying early emerging talent, right, and do statistics and analytics on that to weed out the bias that might be out there. So I really applaud you for that candid insight, and I see more of that happening. It's really, really endearing to see that, that there's hope in a larger context.
Thank you for the comment. I think it's encouraging to hear from you who's from the United Technology, kind of a similar sector as my company, Honeywell, plays. So it's not just the high-tech company, but also those, we call it the software, cyber industrial companies are also joining the force, which is great. So any questions or any other comments? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for the great insights. And this question is particularly addressed to the esteemed HR panelists here. So in my earlier companies, now I've just recently joined Microsoft, so this does not pertain to Microsoft. I'm yet to understand the culture over there. But this pertains to the companies I've worked before. I have seen them extremely dedicated to the concept. There is he for she, there is lean in, there are women network, everything happening. There are special training programs invested for women in leadership. And then it's just a tick mark in the HR books and everything falls flat. Thereafter, there are slides put up in the QBRs where exit interviews kind of slides. There are a lot of data and analytics around it showing that, okay, women have left for better career opportunities, etc., etc. So the slicing and dicing happens after the women employee has left. I had kind of tried to give a suggestion that why don't we track these women employees earlier? Why don't we try to preempt or predict that, we are going to have an exit and work on it, rather than trying to convince a person who has already made up her mind to leave. Because at that point of time, no amount of convincing, saying that I was just thinking about this great role for you, it just does not stop the employee. So I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but yeah, that was a question I wanted to ask HR. Thank you.
I'm happy. I think one is you have to understand what is the ROI of your programs, and then promote and invest those programs that you know retain and develop your employees. So you have to really understand why you're doing certain programs, and then position them appropriately. And I would say, as an HR professional, I would be very nervous if you get to a point where somebody's made that decision and that you're not aware of that already. I think that's really a talent management issue. And then finally, I would say, going back to the point I made about business, is the reason that you have that, and this is something I personally believe, that you have these business-centric diversity and inclusion conversations, is then you're not talking about diversity and inclusion as we should do this, it's the right thing to do. When we talk about innovation and competitive advantage, you're actually putting money where your mouth is. And one of my biggest partners in driving diversity and inclusion, yes, is our business leaders, but actually is our customers. Because when our customers push it and when our customers ask for it, the business sits up and the business takes action. So I work in close partnership with our customers and our business leaders to make what we do in diversity and inclusion real. When it hits the bottom line, people get it, especially in the private sector. So that really is, you have to understand why you're doing programs, you have to have the right metrics in place, you have to promote them appropriately, and then understand how this ultimately affects your bottom line, and use that to drive your initiatives.
Maybe I can just add to this. You mentioned, so to Sophie's point, she said she takes the customer's expectations and then aligns the rest. That happens a lot in consulting and tech companies. I've worked for a pharmaceutical company, and they treat their employees and internal customers, and then the equation changes, right? So I think internal customers versus external customers, maybe that's something to help, because your employees are also your customers. Your internal branding also matters. So that would be able, so that's the change I saw when I moved from a pure tech company to a non-tech company.
To add to those previous comments, what I want to say is, from an organisational perspective, it's those organisations that can attract and retain a diverse workforce. And we're going to see more and more of that. When people don't leave organisations, they join because they're leaders, and they stay because they're leaders. They'll leave the organisation if it's not working. So what we're going to see more and more of organisations being successful in the space that do this well. So I would say is being more targeted around, as an employee or a leader, being more targeted around who you're going to work for and how you're going to engage in that relationship. Often we see those leaders that do this well has not only their existing team, that they've got a succession pathway that goes deep into the organisation should anyone leave their team. And that's what you want to align to, and that's what you want to use as your core pin-up example of what leadership looks like in an organisation.
I'll just take a quick minute to answer that question, because you're absolutely right. I also think we are trying to solve only one side of the equation by putting in programs called Women in Leadership. I think the larger question should be, how do you engage your 78% of your male workforce into the conversation around women? And how do you engage the 22% of your female workforce into a conversation around men, and you make it about talent? I also got to where I am today, let me be honest. I have my ex-alumni company here, GE. I was the sponsor, national champion for the GE Women's Network in India for a really long time. I was also a sponsor for the Asian African, it's called AAF, Asian African Forum, and the Asia Pacific American Forum. No part of me comes from Africa. I went there because I got super excited with diversity as a concept. And I benefited from it. I got 3 jobs because of the fact that I networked in sessions like this. So the conversation is not about women in leadership. It's about talent and how you identify that early. I worry whenever people say we need to have a forum for women in leadership positions. Next time, over the next 10 years when we do this, I really hope we see more men in the room. You want to change the conversation around women? Change the conversation with the men. That's the way to do it.
Absolutely. Very well said. So I don't think, do we have one more, time for one more question? Yes, please.
Well, thanks for taking my question. So, in a male-dominated industry, how do you implement actions on women on leadership without making your male employees feel that they are, at a disadvantage or discriminated? And the step forward would be, how do you make men your advocate for women in leadership?
I might take the lead on that one. Can I say is, let's not wait. Let's not, I mean, we could all say, back to Ajit's point today, is that everyone here could invite a male colleague along today. And if everyone brought a male colleague, would change the room. Absolutely, we can change our behaviours. But I'm going to say, as a woman in leadership now for over 10 years, don't wait, don't look to engage, go and do your thing and do it really well. And you're going to attract both men and women and everyone else who is actually high talent along with you, because we know our vibe attracts our tribe. So do what you do and keep going. Don't wait for an invitation. Don't wait to actually try and engage. Do what you do. And by doing what you do may mean bringing along a male colleague. But the more that we wait for an invitation, or the more that we wait to steer men in this direction, we're spending less time on perhaps shining our light and doing what we do well. And that's our path around our own careers as well.
Yeah,
My
it's
thoughts.
very well said. I think probably I wanted to add on to that because my company, honestly speaking, is a very culturally kind of a traditionally kind of a male-dominated kind of a culture traditionally. And then business-wise, it was also very, kind of a heavy, dodgy kind of thing, right? So they actually have been changed starting from the top leadership. They're starting to hire talents, men or women, including me, right, from the IT background. They've been, changing themselves into a software-led kind of a cyber industry company. And to your point, it's not just about men or women or female leadership or whatever. It's really about the talents. You've got to have the right talents, like what Sophia says, embed into their respective, business kind of a strategy to serve the customers better. So once the top leadership team, has realized that, there are lots of actionable stuff, we can do at all level. At my level, at my boss level, at the top level, we're all taking actions wherever we can to improve the situation. So it's really not just about the gender. It's when we talk about the diversity, it's all about the different minds and the perspectives. When we talk about the inclusion, it's all about bringing those different perspectives and minds together and to do things together and achieve the common goals.
And I'll give you one great example. At SAP, we also have a Business Women's Network group, very similar to what we do at Dell. It's been running now for 10 years and it has over 15,000 members. It is very strong here in Singapore and it's well established. We ran a mentoring program for the Business Women's Network group. Can I say is that part of that mentoring program, 40% of the participants who signed up for mentoring were men. And I now mentor as part of the Business Women's Network for men. So the ability to go, if you do really well at your job, men will go, actually, how do I do more of what she's doing? And you lead from the front.
Well, and I think finally it's about leading with a conversation on inclusion, right? Because we jump off into a diversity conversation, which if we don't add the inclusion piece, it can appear as a segregated conversation. But when you build an inclusive workplace, men, women, all dimensions of diversity ultimately benefit. So I'll give you an example. Usually when we talk about one of the common things that'll come up in maybe Women's Network might be an issue around workplace flexibility, right? And we say we want to give workplace flexibility because it's great, especially for women who might have caretaking responsibilities. But again, in positioning it that way, we're reinforcing traditional gender stereotypes. An example of how you could engage men in that conversation is, please join our Women's Network. Help us to promote and push for workplace flexibility. And I would guarantee you that all the men in this room would also like to would like to benefit from workplace flexibility. And so when you advocate for inclusion, that doesn't just benefit women, that benefits men as well. And especially with young men, and we think about the issue around parenting, you'll find a lot of young men in particular want to be really active parents at home, but they may not necessarily feel that there's a culture at work that allows them to do that. So a way that you can get them engaged in Women's Network or diversity inclusion more generally is to get them talking about issues that are personal to them, and will ultimately benefit them and their success at work as well.
Hey, Sophie, even the older men like that, huh?
Excellent. So let's, very good question and a very good answers. Thanks to the panelists. So let's wrap up. Can I invite my panelists, each one of them, just to have one sentence as a key takeaway for the audience here today? Sophia, please.
Create your own path.
I think for a sustainable career, you need to find your strengths and have your own brand and take the support wherever you need.
Build your tribe. They're the ones that are going to take you through in your career, men and women.
Well said.
I'll go back to Noel Tichy's very old book that featured Jack Welch, Control Your Destiny or Someone Else Will.
Excellent. So my takeaway would be, while we're talking about the future of work, the AI, and as a human being, we try to figure out what's the future relationship between us and the robots. We got to figure out how we sort out the man-we-me relationship, the leadership, and sort out the imbalance issue. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.